Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. So it looks like I'm discussing Russia's economy again. I mean, I've looked at the impact of Ukraine's bombardment of oil refineries, the deep mess that the Russian military is in, and the near collapse of their vital coal industry. But Russia have another major economic headache, which is actually shared by other advanced economies. They are not immune. Good old-fashioned birth rate decline. And the situation has become so critical that Putin has been trying to make it a key feature of speeches and has even offered financial incentives for teenagers to get pregnant, and it ain't working. Although these efforts are probably undermined as well by sending hundreds of thousands of young men to die in his wars of overreach. Is Putin about to learn the biological concept of overshoot and dieback? So before I get onto the economic bits, there is a term in biology for populations which overexpand and then suffer a population crash. Overshoot and dieback. Overshoot is when the population exceeds its support resources. What then follows, the dieback, is a massive population crash. And it doesn't just mean the population scales back to what is sustainable. It can result in the elastic snapping much further back than that. Now, this is a simplification to show how it can work, but let us imagine a population of like, I don't know, evil frogs or something. And let's say they need 50 units of food to survive. Their woodland domain can provide, say, 500,000 units of food sustainably. So that would support 10,000 evil frogs. But let's say their population suddenly explodes to 20,000. Well, that's too much. But it's not the case that half the population would just die out. It's not the case that 10,000 frogs are getting their 50 units and the other 10,000 getting nothing, so all die. All 20,000 frogs are likely to consume some resources, meaning the number below the 50 threshold will be very high, much higher than 10,000. The population struggles for a while until catastrophe, and maybe the vast majority of the population collapses because everyone is consuming something, but very few are able to consume enough. Well, Russia may be undergoing some of this themselves, especially as they are diverting a lot of their own resources into wars which offer no obvious ways to become profitable when most of their richest trade partners have applied harsh sanctions. To really get the scale of this collapse, you have to look at the numbers. So in 2024, Russia recorded just 1.22 million births, which was the lowest total since the economic chaos of 1999. But 2025 is on course to be even worse. Based on preliminary data, the first quarter of the year saw the lowest number of births in over 200 years, with only around 294,000 babies born. February 2025 marks the single worst month for births in modern Russian history. And while deaths have declined a bit, they are still outpacing births by a huge margin. In just the first 2 months of 2025, Russia's population shrank by nearly 119,000 people just from natural decline, not being thrown into the meat grinder. The total fertility rate is around 1.4 children per woman. That is much below the 2.1 you need just to keep a population stable. Projections from the United Nations are painting a bit of a picture. In the worst case scenario, Russia's population of 146 million people will plummet to as low as 57 million by the year 2100, assuming Trump hasn't destroyed us by then. Even Russia's own state agency, in its most pessimistic forecast, says that the population could fall to 130 million by 2046. A nation's power is built on its people. A smaller population means a smaller economy, a smaller military, and a much smaller presence on the world stage. Russia isn't just shrinking, it's been hollowed out from the inside. So what's behind this freefall? Well, Russia's demographic crisis isn't new. Just like in a lot of advanced economies, its roots run deep into the 20th century. The sheer devastation of World War II wiped out an entire generation of men, which created a demographic echo that causes a cyclical drop in births roughly every 25 years as each smaller generation comes of age. The cycle has been repeating for decades now. Then came the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. That triggered the next major shock. The 1990s were a time of brutal economic turmoil, social chaos, and just a sort of sense of not being sure where their country was going. So life expectancy plummeted and death rates skyrocketed, especially amongst men due to rampant alcoholism and accidents. Birth rates collapsed as families lost any hope for a secure future. This period is often shown on a chart called the Russian cross, where the death rate line crossed above the birth rate line. And that trend has defined the country's trajectory ever since. Then the full scale of invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Massive accelerant to the crisis. While official numbers are not public, of course, Western intelligence and independent analysis, as of this summer, estimates at least 219,000 Russian soldiers have been killed, with the total number of casualties, which includes the wounded, potentially topping 700,000. These are, of course, overwhelmingly young men, right in their prime for working and reproduction. Their loss isn't just a family tragedy, it's a demographic catastrophe for the nation. The war has also kicked off a massive brain drain. Some estimates suggest around 800,000 people, mostly young, educated and skilled, have left Russia to avoid being drafted or to protest the regime. This exodus strips the country of its most dynamic and innovative citizens, the people needed to build a modern economy. And on top of all of that, you've got persistently high mortality rates from preventable causes continuing to plague the nation. Alcoholism is the leading cause of death for men, contributing to a 10-year gap in life expectancy between men and women. And the fallout from this demographic implosion is not a distant threat, it's here and now. It's fundamentally reshaping Russia's place in the world. This is where a domestic problem becomes a full-blown geopolitical disaster, from Russia's point of view anyway. First, the economy is grinding to a halt because of severe labour shortages. By the end of 2024, Russian companies were reportedly short about 2.2 million workers, with nearly 70% of businesses reporting a scarcity of labour. Key sectors like construction, manufacturing, agriculture, transport are all struggling to find workers. That slows economic growth, hits productivity, makes it impossible for Russia to modernise its economy or compete with rising global players. The rampant corruption doesn't help either. A shrinking workforce also means less tax revenue, which limits the Kremlin's ability to fund its military, maintain infrastructure, or provide basic social services. Then Russia's military power is being eroded from the inside out. A nation with a shrinking pool of young men can't sustain a large modern army forever. Projections show that the number of draft-age men in Russia is set to decline significantly, potentially by as much as 40% by 2050. The military is already so strained that there are anecdotal reports from the front line of older recruits being sent as reinforcement, dad's army basically. And, some soldiers apparently are mocking them for being like a sort of an army of grandpas, who struggle, of course, with the physical demands of modern warfare. This economic and military decline translates into a weaker status on the world stage. A country that can't sustain its own population can't sustain its claim to be a great power. Russia's ability to influence international affairs, fight long wars, or compete in global markets is being completely undermined by the brutal fact it's running out of people. And faced with this crisis, the Kremlin has tried and failed to turn things around. For years, Putin has tried to talk about the demographic problem. He's launched high-profile national projects. He's offered financial incentives like maternity capital to encourage families to have more children. But the efforts have been a drop in the ocean. They've failed to overcome the basic economic uncertainty and social anxiety that stops Russians from starting families, just as in other countries with the same problem. Instead of real systemic policy, the government tried to turn to ideological campaigns, trying to promote the idea of having them without actually addressing the reason why people are not having more babies. Promoting these like traditional values, restricting abortions, measures that do nothing to fix the root causes of the decline. For decades, Russia used another tool to plug the population gap, again, like a lot of countries, migration. The flow of workers from post-Soviet republics in Central Asia helped to offset the natural population decline. But that solution's breaking down. Russia is becoming a less attractive place to work because of a stagnant economy and massively rising xenophobia. In fact, the number of legal migrant workers has fallen significantly from its peak in the early 2010s, which leaves Russia facing a future defined by two dangerous trends. Internally, the demographic balance of the country is shifting. The proportion of ethnic Russians is falling, while the population of non-Russian ethnic groups, particularly from the Caucasus and Central Asia, that's growing. That could weaken the sort of national unity that Putin tries to generate, stir up internal tensions, especially as the Kremlin disproportionately sends soldiers from those ethnic minority regions to fight and die in Ukraine. Externally, Russia's weakness is creating a power vacuum across Eurasia. As Moscow's economic and military influence fades, its ability to dominate neighbouring countries in Central Asia and the Caucasus is slipping. The void is eagerly filled by other players, most notably China, of course, which is expanding its economic and political footprint all along the region. Russia is losing its grip on its own backyard and is on its way to becoming a junior partner in a region it once controlled. And instead of focusing on its problems at home, it is focused on overexpanding when it would be a major challenge to even stand still right now. And could this overextension prove fatal for Russia over the next generation? Overshoot and die back. Maybe Putin should get a few biologists into his strategy meetings. But let me know what you think in the comments below, and please subscribe to the channel for more content. Thanks for listening, and until next time, I'll see you later.